All right, so for the purpose of this one, I am going to assume that you are at least somewhat aware of the Fresh and Fit podcast, or Andrew Tate, or the manosphere, or this whole general cultural milieu. If you're not, and you've been living under a rock for the last couple of years, first of all, lucky you. It's much better to be living under a rock. Objectively better. Your life is probably happier than mine, and I'm glad for you. But I am about to ruin it. So I'll start with Fresh and Fit. I think they're the best example. They're a group of men who make very provocative, sort of misogynistic statements about women and about sex and dating. They're sort of social commentators, but they're very, very casual social commentators, and they're very abrasive, very clickbaity, I feel. I feel like they're very, like, attention grabby, so to speak. And they're sort of making statements that would obviously not be allowed in a polite society. The way this conversation has gone so far is there's basically two camps, right? There's the pro Fresh and Fit Andrew Tate manosphere group, okay? And there's a lot of that sentiment, generally speaking, on the political right. And Tate has done his best to endear himself to the political right and to unify the stuff he's saying about women with the broader right-wing platform or project. A lot of the times, right? He associates himself with cryptocurrency and investing, and he also associates himself with, like, anti-LGBT politics, stuff like that. Sort of generally associates himself with the right politically. Okay, so there's that group, and then on the other hand, there is generally, like, liberal-minded feminists on the other side. Vaguely liberal-minded feminists coming in to criticize from the perspective that, beauty is subjective, and men and women aren't so different after all. Maybe they're somewhat different, but not as different as he says they are. And generally things should be gender egalitarian and non-hierarchical and socially liberal, of a pluralistic approach to different ways of being, different ways of dating, so on and so forth. I'm going to sort of come into that conversation and say that there's another perspective from which one could theoretically criticize these influencers. And that is a sort of traditional conservative perspective. You could call it like a moderate conservative or a principled conservative perspective. It's very much unlike the sort of MAGA republicanism that is dominant today, but it could not really reasonably be described as left-wing or liberal in any way either. So, for example, one thing that people on, like, the Fresh and Fit podcast have said, this was one of their big provocative statements that really blew them up, was they said something about men being able to cheat on women, but women shouldn't be able to cheat on men. And that's the provocative part, is the fundamental unequal nature of the discussion, right? And you can see why there could be a sort of a right-left framing on this one, right? Where the right believes that men are men and women are women, and they're different things. And so maybe that differentness means that sort of inequality, where one set of rules applies to men and another set of rules applies to women, makes sense. And from the other view, men and women aren't so different, so they don't have to follow those sorts of rules, and the rules should be the same for everybody, which means either no one should cheat or everybody can cheat. But there's another perspective one could take here as well, and that is the equality through marriage sort of a perspective, right? A lot of conservatives believe in, like, one man, one woman marriage. And I don't just mean in the sense of opposing gay marriage. I mean in the sense that it's an egalitarian sort of a process, right? When you take a man and a woman with different sets of traits, right? They're operating under the assumption that men and women are quite different from one another. But through union, through having to come together and compromise with one another, they become in many ways more alike to one another. This is the sort of classical Christian view of marriage, is that there is man and there is woman, and then there is union. And union is sort of the ideal to strive towards. And from this perspective, you can see a criticism being launched at both Andrew Tate type motherfuckers, fresh and fit type motherfuckers, and this sort of Nietzschean woman's empowerment thing we got going on these days, right? I think the epitome of this is Marina and the Diamonds. If you've never listened to her music, she has this women can use sex and beauty to get power, and also they can use feminism to get power, and also they can be anti-feminist, one of the bros, they can use raunch culture to get power. And her music is all about, she doesn't care about feminism. At least her persona in the songs doesn't care about feminism, doesn't care about the opposite of feminism. She cares about power. She individually wants power, and she's going to use whatever mixture of feminism and anti-feminism is necessary to give her, as a woman, power in society. And I think you can see this struggle playing out right now. The fresh and fit people, when they say things like men should be able to cheat on women, but women shouldn't be able to cheat on men, what they're describing there is a power dynamic. They're describing a dynamic of your goal as a man who is in their audience is to get power. You're trying to build like a harem, so to speak. You're trying to build a harem of women who are controlled by you, right? The goal is to have as little responsibility to others as possible, while having as many other people have responsibility towards you as possible. Okay? And you can see this in reverse, too. You could hear an argument being made that there are certain mechanisms in society, like maybe dating apps, that women generally have an easier time using, right? Women get more matches on dating apps, is what I'm saying there. And you can say that that's because men and women are quite different. It's because of evolutionary psychological divide there, right? You can see a power struggle take place between men and women, where maybe the women will say things like, well, I kind of like dating apps because they allow me to vet men prior to meeting them IRL. Whereas men might say things like, I kind of prefer IRL dating because it allows me to get a chance to get my foot in the door and have a conversation, and maybe once there, it turns out that I'm really charming and funny and so on. And once you got your foot in the door, because you're in real life and in a community, maybe you have a better chance, right? So you can see a sort of a power struggle happening there, where the women's goal is to move the contest, move the dating sphere into a battlefield of this alienated dating app landscape that maybe benefits them more. And then the men's goal is to move it into this other battlefield, this other landscape that maybe benefits them more. And I think what we're seeing more and more today is not feminism or conservatism or anti-feminism. It is a war of power, all against all, between men and women. The goal is no longer equality of any kind, by any definition. It is either the men win or the women win. And this weird contest, this war between men and women, this power struggle is obviously undesirable to anyone involved. And it creates a lot of antisocial behavior. Because, well, it might, for all I know, maybe it's the case that a small handful of these male influencers actually go out and build a real harem and get power. Okay, maybe that's the case. But the vast majority of people who are consuming this content are like weaselly little 14-year-old boys who then go out and try to be like going up to women, and they'll just like go up to women and just be like, I should be allowed to cheat on you, but you shouldn't be allowed to cheat on me. And the result of that is, A, that they don't get women, right? Obviously, if you're coming at them with that deeply unequal attitude. And then also B, it's just super antisocial, right? It's super antisocial. When you view everything through this perspective of war, there's no way for men and women to come together happily. In this perspective, liberalization of culture has caused men and women's innate differences to expand, to grow, to become ever more visible, to become ever more competitive with one another within the way society is set up. And so the opposite of that is an illiberal social structure, like marriage or traditional Christian conservatism or something along those lines, that could come in and create equal unions between men and women. Now obviously there's a bit of tension around this idea, for me even, because I am like a little gay and stuff. So, there's a little part of me that's like, man-woman marriage. So you don't want me to be able to marry a man if I want to? Shouldn't that really be up to me? And so what I think we need culturally is a way to assist these sort of gender equal relations and unions between men and women that help to get rid of this gender divide, which I believe inevitably results from a liberalization of culture, if it is true that men and women are somewhat different from one another. Then having this like free, open, individualist culture necessarily creates men going one way, women going another, and a war of the sexes, which is not what we want societally. And so what we need is a sort of a softer conservatism that can be more pluralistic, that isn't just finger wagging at people, that isn't just like shaming people, and which isn't trying to exclude, say, gay people, for example, or maybe polyamorous people also. I think you can get kind of close to this if you look at the texts of like post-liberal thinkers. I'm going to put in the description of this video a couple of interviews from this author of this book called Family Unfriendly. And this author is writing that our culture has become very unfriendly towards raising children. And he argues that what we need to do is not finger wag at people. We shouldn't be like, hey, you have to have kids. You should have kids, and if you don't, you're inferior in some way. Oh, what, you're a single mother? That's bad, because don't you know that two-parent families are better? That doesn't work. It doesn't accomplish anything. What might work better is attaching systems of benefits to married couples, attaching benefit systems to people who have kids. Maybe instead of universal childcare, you create a universal fund that goes towards households, but then the households get to decide how they want to spend it, kind of like a universal basic income of sorts, where maybe they decide that they want to spend it on childcare, or maybe somebody wants to be a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, and you get that close-knitness of raising kids that so many conservatives miss and long for from like the good old days. Maybe you create social programs that are not sticks, drop the stick, that are not sticks, but are carrots. Maybe you try to create a system that subtly encourages people in the direction of commitment and love instead of war and sexual conflict, And maybe you try to make it easier for people to have bigger families if they want to, by making it so that they can financially afford to do so through like child tax credits and so on. Maybe if you take that sort of an approach to this issue, you can heal some of this divide. And so you don't necessarily need to have this strict social constructionist feminist perspective to take issue with the things that people like Andrew Tate and Fresh and Fit are saying, to take issue with the state of culture these days. And you can do stuff about it that is a lot more constructive than just getting mad at each other on the internet. You can do real material policy changes that might actually help people to live happier lives and have happier relationships. Relationships are not separate from the economy. They're deeply entangled with it. And there are things we can do economically to make people's relationships happier and healthier so that they don't have to turn to these sorts of influencers in the first place.